break out your bingo cards because we've got all your favorites. From Hollywood to the Holocaust to South African apartheid. It's a supersized episode of Seemingly Unrelated. It's Tuesday, or whatever day it is for you, and you know what that means. Time for another edition of Seemingly Unrelated. I am your co-host, Jason Heat. I'm a writer, director, producer, podcaster, as well as professional wrestling commentator and creative. But I would be nothing without the captain of this vessel, the good ship Unrelated.
That's me, Dr. Andrew Johnstone, lecturer in the digital humanities at King's College London.
And a tripod can only stand with 3 legs, so we are joined, as always, by our producer, editor, and Gen Z ambassador, Naomi.
Hello. Happy Tuesday, everyone. And yeah, Gen Z ambassador at your service.
Seemingly Unrelated stands proud to combat misinformation and spark intellectual curiosity in the way that only we can. Because Mr. Professor Andrew Johnstone has the unique ability to pick out facts, figures, anecdotes, and information from history, politics, society, and culture and tie them together in a way that many people would be unable to do so. So he comes in, he knows a lot, I do not, and I'm going to learn along with the rest of you. Where in the world Carmen Johnstone is taking us today? Where are we going? Where's your red coat? Where's your red hat? Why do you not look like a beautiful international thief? I'm pretty disappointed. I've set myself up for my own disappointment.
Yeah, that is kind of disappointing. Carmen Sandiego was definitely a hottie. I'm going to take a second to plug you, Jason. See, Jason has a Substack called Scratching the Iceberg. And I have been reading it and I have been enjoying it. And it's got me thinking, got the juices flowing about media, about things that we like to enjoy, because that's what the Substack is about. It's about movies. It's about comic books. It's about shopping for comic books.
I will say, usually I like it when the juices start flowing, but in the context of an iceberg, it is rather ominous. Those juices we want to stay nice, cold, and packed into the berg.
But realistic. So it got me thinking about movies. You love movies. I love movies. Jason, you know who else loved movies?
Steven Spielberg.
That is both true and relevant. No, Hitler. Hitler loved movies.
What a U-turn.
He went straight there.
No. Noted artist Hitler. Oh, boy. You just barreled right through. What a segue.
You didn't butter us up
baby.
at
We're
all.
hitting the ground. We're hitting the ground running. No, Jason, did you know that Hitler has a IMDB page?
I did not. No.
Yep,
as a character, because I understand. Right.
No, as an actor.
No, I hate that. I understand that he would be a character because many actors have played the man with the mustache and the genocide, but I know what he was in movies.
Yeah.
Are you sure you're not thinking of Charlie Chaplin?
No, sir. No. Adolf Hitler has an IMDb page. He was either a actor, writer, director, or producer on 42 films in his lifetime.
Who the fuck felt like it was their purpose in life to put that credit in? Spoiler alert for all of you listening 100 years later. IMDb didn't exist when Hitler did, so someone had to decide, you know what's missing on the International Movie Database? Hitler's credits. That's what we're missing. It's not a Wikipedia page. No one needs to give him the producer credit. Fuck this.
Actually, if you want to, we don't have time for it on this episode, but if you really want to just, I don't know, laugh or cry for about 15 minutes, check out Hitler's IMDb page, because they have to give him like a biography and like a like, trivia about him like he's a normal actor, and it'll be things like, yeah, he's famous for his mustache and his Roman inspired salute and all these things. You're like,
Yeah, that's what he's famous for.
oh yeah, and then they're like, and his anti-Semitic tirades. It's incredible. He was either an actor, writer, director, or producer in 42 films in his life. All of his acting credits are indeed as self. So it's not like he was playing another character. He was playing himself. And probably his most famous film, which he produced and was in, is Triumph of the Will, which you may or may not have heard of, but for those unfamiliar.
I have heard of it.
Okay. It's just a movie by Leni Riefenstahl, who was this German director that Hitler maybe had a crush on. Who knows what's going on? But she was very willing to do what the state wanted her to do with making films. And The Triumph of the Will is just about how great the Germans were, how they're the best people in all the ways, and the soul of the German people will triumph over evil, which they don't explicitly say is the Jews, but it's pretty obviously the Jews.
Not high on subtext here.
There's so much subtext. So Hitler, he actually personally loved the cinema. He loved the movies. He thought that the movies were this transformative experience. So
I can't believe you started this fucking episode off with, I like your Substack, it makes me think of Hitler. It's the worst endorsement I've ever received.
No, Jason has nothing to do with Hitler. What did Hitler like about the movies? He thought it was a transformative experience. That when you sit in the dark room and you watch the screen. No,
be honest.
we're talking about Hitler's opinion on movies.
Yeah, here's the thing, though. What did Hitler like about the movies? I don't think Hitler liked anything different about the movies than anybody else. It's not like suddenly I'm like, oh, Hitler had a very different experience at the movies. He's just
No, he was. Right. He was a regular movie fan. His favorite movies were King Kong and Mickey Mouse shorts. The man was obsessed with Mickey Mouse. Weird fact about Hitler. What he did see that is unique to his perspective of movies is the power that experience, that fact that a person can sit down in a room and be completely transported and completely lose their sense of self, which is very much part of like film's power. That could really be utilized to manipulate the emotions of the audience and direct them in whatever way that the creators of the film want them to go. He was one of the first, him and Joseph Goebbels, his minister of propaganda, were both early adopters of the idea that the movie, the cinema, the film of a subject will inform people about what that subject means.
I'm depressed. You have really set...
It doesn't... It gets better. I mean, it gets better.
It probably is the first episode that starts so dark and then gets lighter, I feel. Whereas normally he takes us down a winding light path to somewhere terrible, but he started with the terrible stuff.
When we look at all 42 of Hitler's film credits, right, in the IMDb.
I just keep thinking of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy every time you say 42, and it's really, you're ruining a lot for me.
Interesting connection. I didn't even think about that. Put a pin in that. That could be useful one day. When we look at all 42 of his credits on IMDb, they are pretty much all related to the German state propaganda. So they fall into two categories. One is movies like Triumph of the Will, which, I mean, inherent in the title, talk about the greatness of the German soul, how dominant the German people are, and try to... There's a lot of like movies about the Alps for some reason. He was really obsessed with being like, we have these beautiful mountains. This is Germany. This is the soul of the German people. The other side of the coin, the other batch of the 42 are propaganda films designed to cover up the atrocities of the Third Reich. Things like films about the creation of the Volkswagen, the people's car, and this great big power plant that they were supposed to design and build, and all these vacations that Germans were supposed to go on, but they really just took their money and built tanks so that they could get their war effort going. He's got a lot of them. And one of the last ones, and potentially the last film that Hitler saw, he may have screened this before retreating to his bunker. This is a weird fact. Is 1944's Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt. Does that sound familiar to you at all? Theresienstadt?
No.
It's the name of a ghetto that was in Czechoslovakia. That's a capital G ghetto for everyone out there. Ghetto is a very specific term that refers to urban centers of concentration for Jews during the Second World War, and dissidents, not just Jews, but mostly Jews, and not just the poor neighborhood in your town. That has always been a weird one for me.
Yeah, I'm stuck on wondering what the Rotten Tomato scores for Hitler's various movies are now.
Don't look it up. It's not gonna make it. It's not gonna make you happy, Jason. Do you think the Rotten Tomato score or Triumph for the Will is gonna be? No, don't look it up.
Yeah, I suppose if you're watching it, you probably, I don't know, I guess you could hate watch it, but you're probably agreeing with some of it.
Oddly enough, it tends to get assigned in like film classes at universities.
Really?
As a sort of like, yeah, as an example, like the example of like the use of cinema as a propaganda tool. They're like, let's watch Triumph for the Will, and you as a student can go, or
I thought you were gonna say it's often assigned in cinema school as a real test of can you appreciate the art despite the artist?
Yeah, that's where I thought you were going.
Let's really put your values to the test, film student with an axe to grind. I can appreciate the art.
Yeah.
I can separate it. Okay.
Oh, Theresienstadt. So hopefully the last time I get to say that. It's actually the last in a series of films ordered by Hitler and Goebbels and carried out by the SS to show what life was really like, air quotes, in these camps that Jews were gathered into. The camps are often described as spa towns, where elderly Jews are sent to, quote, retire in safety.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, there's like 5 of these, Jason.
Spa towns?
Spa towns.
Do you know, this is so interesting when I was reading it, because I don't know, I've probably mentioned it in episodes before, but my granddad was a refugee. He escaped the concentration camps in Czechoslovakia, and most of my relatives were in them. So thinking that they're just like shooting movies of it and calling it a spa town is just absolutely crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is the Second World War, as we've discussed. It's dark. And these films, they're made throughout the duration of the Second World War in particular, when we really see the escalation of concentration camps and ghettos as part of the final solution, which is, for those not familiar, the term that the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, came up with for the solving the problem of the Jew, as they called it. They wanted to eliminate all Jewish people from the world as much as they could, and so that's how they executed it, literally. But the last one, this Theresienstadt, they didn't have the manpower. The SS didn't have the manpower to make the movie themselves. So for this propaganda movie, which portrays this ghetto in Czechoslovakia as a spa town, they actually employed prisoners of that ghetto, Jewish people who were being kept against their will, into making this movie. And they specifically chose one guy to direct it. And that guy's name is Kurt Garon. Have you ever heard of Kurt Garand before, Jason?
I have not heard of Kurt Garand. No, I'm sure that he has a robust IMDb page as well.
He does. He made 20 movies in the year 1928. This guy was like disturbingly prolific. Have you heard of Bertolt Brecht's Three Penny Opera or the song Mac the Knife?
I have very much heard both of the Three Penny Opera and, of course, Mac the Knife.
So Kurt Garand was the first person to portray the police captain in the Three Penny Opera and sing the song Mac the Knife in 1928. He was a noted Weimar cabaret performer and film star. And so he is the originator of that song, Mac the Knife, which of course would later be made famous by Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald.
How does Mac the Knife go, though? Because I don't recognize any of those things. And now for something completely unrelated.
You know, when that shark bites with his teeth, babe, scarlet billows start to spread. Fancy gloves, where's old Mac Heath, babe? So there's never a trace of red. Da-ba-da. Anyway.
No recollection.
I can't believe you mentioned all the people that made that song famous and didn't mention Bobby Darin, who is by far the most popular person to sing Mac the Knife.
Well, I mean, it's Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. I just thought
I've
more
never heard
people,
that song
like, you know, I get to do this. Naomi, do you know who Bobby Darin is?
Nope. Should I?
How about Louis Armstrong or Ella Fitzgerald?
Okay, I know who they are, but mainly because my granddad was obsessed with Louis Armstrong. My sister used to play clarinet. He heard she was playing a Louis Armstrong song, and he bought her about 30 Louis Armstrong CDs and gave her the whole collection. And I think she probably never listened to any of them, my sister. So that's the reason I remember him.
Yeah. I mean, that's also because he's like one of the most famous musicians of the 20th century, I think.
Least controversial thing you've said today is that Louis Armstrong is a legendary musician. And now, back to Hitler.
So he makes 20 films in 1928, and he just does that year over year, with most of them being about how socialist values are great and the Nazis are bad. Oh, and he's Jewish. So he was really on a short list to be deported to a ghetto in 1943. Despite the fact that he had lived in the Netherlands, which up to that point was not a place where people were deported from. So
you know that the point of me on the show is to make jokes, right?
You'll have an opportunity.
Well, I'm not finding one.
I was just thinking that this is a tough one.
When Kurt Garand, the first person to sing Mac the Knife, was sent to the ghetto, he brought that spirit of entertainment with him because he was trying to just make life bearable in this environment. He immediately joined and became an organizer of theatrical performances and was just trying to give some distraction to his fellow, let's say it for real, inmates in this scenario. So when the SS got the order to make this movie, a bunch of them recognized Kurt Garand because they had seen him in a load of movies. And they said, we'll get this guy to direct it, and he's going to gather up a bunch of Jews for us to act like this is a nice spa town. And according to survivors from this filming, which is
a gig's a gig.
A gig. Hey, well, and that's kind of
in this economy.
Yeah. That's kind of Garand's sort of thinking. There's a lot of sources in this, but it seems like his thinking was, okay, well, I'll make this movie, and it'll buy me some credit. Maybe I won't get like sent off and like executed. Like this sounds like maybe I can, I'm not gonna get paid in money, but maybe I'll get paid in my life potentially. So he agreed to the job.
The only time exposure bucks may have actually been a worthwhile investment.
Exactly. So they literally make this movie at gunpoint. Like the whole film all the survivors from this movie are like, oh yeah, we never got the script pages until like right before we needed to shoot. And Kurt was trying to do everything he could just to like work with the actors and make this seem like anything was going on. And like the big scene in it is Kurt Garand performing Mac the Knife. He performed Mac the Knife in like the cafeteria for an audience, and
so this isn't like a documentary, like a fake documentary. This is
Yeah,
like an actual.
It's about no, but scenes like it's like, oh look, they're having a great time. They have legendary cabaret performer Kurt Garand to perform Mac the Knife for them live. Like that was what this scene.
They're trying to make the ghettos into the Catskills.
Right, exactly, or like just a nice retirement community. People in the cafeteria, all the actors are supposed to be laughing for some reason, which doesn't really make sense for the song Mac the Knife. But off camera is a actual firing squad. And if anyone didn't laugh, they would be shot. And then they'd reset the film and start the scene again. It is outrageously dark. So he finishes the film on like November 7th, sends the cut off to Goebbels so that it can become this piece of propaganda. And then on November 15th, 1944, Garand was put on a train and executed at the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp.
What the
so
fuck?
It did not work for him. It went really bad. Yeah, it was insane. It's so dark. It is so dark.
How long after that did the Allies liberate?
That particular region where in Czechoslovakia would have been within 6 months. It was
Because
close.
you said this was the last movie that Hitler
Yeah.
watched.
Yes. This is probably the last movie that he watched. So it was 6 months. But that performance of Mac the Knife marks his final performance of anything in his career. A very haunting scene that you cannot watch because that is not a film that is available for viewing. I believe it's in the National Archives of Germany, but it's under special protections. So one of the movies, and probably Garand's biggest movie during his career, that was explicitly socialist in its messaging and was a very impactful film, was 1930's Blue Angel. Big hit movie, international. It's a German movie, but it went international.
Little known prequel to Blue Velvet.
If only it had anything to do with Blue Velvet. No, it's a story about a pedantic bourgeois like teacher, like headmaster at a school, who falls in love.
Andrew Johnston.
Nope, not a headmaster at a school. If only, that's a horrible job. No thanks. He falls in love with a bohemian cabaret dancer at the nearby cabaret, and he is destroyed because she takes all of his he gives her gifts over and over and over again. He tries to buy her affection, and then when he runs out of money, she's like, "Bye," and he's destroyed because the thing that he wanted the most was this potentially teenage girl in that situation. It's the 30s, Jason. Yeah, his greed, his capitalist insistence that he can own anything is what ultimately destroys him in that movie. And apparently Hitler did not like that movie. Apparently he was mad about 1930s.
He really thought that guy should get the girl.
Yeah.
Why doesn't that man end up with the lady?
I mean, hot take. Hitler, just bad opinions on women and consent. It's my hot take on
Shocking.
Hitler. That cabaret dancer, that bohemian cabaret dancer, was portrayed by none other than Marlene Dietrich. The legendary, that is her first movie. That's her, or it's actually her second or third movie, but that's her breakout role. That's when Hollywood became aware of Marlene Dietrich, this movie that she did with Kurt Garand.
And for those who may not know, give us a little bit on Marlene Dietrich.
So Marlene Dietrich, Oscar-winning actress who's probably most known for working with like Orson Welles in Touch of Evil, or she was in Shanghai Express, a load of huge movies. She's been in she was an it girl. That's it. She was the competition for Greta Garbo in the 1930s, if that makes any more sense to anyone out there. One of her claims to fame, one of the first, or maybe even the first, two women kissing scene in a Hollywood film is 1930s Morocco with Marlene Dietrich donning like a suit. She puts on a man's suit and then she kisses another woman, and everyone was scandalized. The very thought of it. And then they stopped caring. But she was a huge, huge celebrity. After Blue Angel, she goes to Hollywood. That's where she gets to work with Orson Welles and Hitchcock and all of these like incredible directors, and made a stupid amount of movies. Like,
she got
so
out
many
at a
movies.
good time, one might say.
Yeah, she did. She did. But she had the opportunity multiple times to go back to Germany. In fact, there are 4 separate occasions where the Third Reich, the Nazi government, offered her multi-million-dollar, this is 1930s money, this is the Great Depression, everybody, multi-million-dollar contracts to come back to Germany and do some of these Hitler movies where she would be like the great
phrase, do some of these Hitler movies.
Do some of these
just,
Hitler movies.
Just whole genre. Do some
whole
of these
genre.
Hitler movies.
She'd get to be like the embodiment of the ideal German woman, right? That was the sort of the plan. She would be, there's the Ubermensch, she's the Uber lady. But her response was that in 1937, she became a U.S. citizen and renounced her German citizenship. That was her. They offered her $4 million, and she was like, no, I'm not German anymore. Bye. I shall not be complacent in your nonsense.
Turning down money to be American, maybe the most un-American activity of all.
So, what she did do was she would help people emigrate to the United States. When she got these offers...
Do they know how to code?
No, but I think they know how to make a nice matzo ball soup, because she specifically formed a group of ex-German artists in Hollywood who pooled their resources to help Jews and dissidents escape from the Nazis from the 30s on to the end of the war. In 1937, she was paid $450,000 to star in 1937's Night Without Armor, and she put all of that money, every penny, went towards rescuing Jews from the Nazis.
That's incredible. Why is there not a Dietrich's list?
I know. Yeah, like she's the real. I mean, Schindler was also a real person, but she's another Schindler.
Incredible, and I'm legitimately like, that's a phenomenal thing to do and to know and to recognize. B, you would think that this is the kind of story that Hollywood would desperately want to immortalize, because it mixes the mythology of the golden age of Hollywood along with someone providing salvation from the Holocaust. I mean, This is, and it's a biopic. I mean, fucking Oscar bait out the wazoo. How has no one made this story?
Because she's a woman.
Yeah, part of it is that she's a woman.
This woman, you're saying she was the first lesbian kiss in Hollywood.
Yeah.
She, was the it girl of the entire sphere. She's a beautiful young woman that they'd be able to cast to play her, and she rescues people from the fucking Nazis and tells Hitler to shove it. I mean, it is insane to me that this is not something that I can watch right now on Amazon Prime.
You know what, Jason? Let's do it. If I may, also up the ante in terms of fleshing the cast out for this biopic. Her close friend, this is how she met, a close friend and frequent collaborator, Billy Wilder, director Billy Wilder, who used to have the record for most Oscars a single human being has ever had, and is one of only 4 people to win both the Palme d'Or and Best Picture, Best Director in the same year. The other one of those being Sean Baker for Anora most recently. But Billy Wilder heralded one of the greats. Some like it hot. He's done amazing stuff. And he and Dietrich worked together a load of times after the war, but this is how they met, saving Jews.
And now for something completely unrelated.
Andrew, how do you feel about Billy Wilder and Sean Baker sharing the distinction of the only director to win both the Academy Award and the Palme d'Or?
There are 4 people who have done that. Not great. Not great. One of them saved Jews and went on to make literally one of my all-time top 5 favorite movies, 1960s The Apartment. And the other one, I just don't like him.
Wait, who are we talking about?
Sean Baker.
Do I know anyone? I don't think I know anything.
No.
So Billy Wilder is the second banana, effectively, in this biopic of Marlene Dietrich. He was a Austrian Jew, Austrian Polish, but he grew up in Austria, who also left for the United States in the early 1930s for different reasons than Marlene Dietrich. She went to get money and he went for safety. And he was a really popular director in Austria before he left. And there was like offers from the Austrian Nazi Party for him to do stuff, but he was like, I don't trust this at all. And he went straight to Hollywood for safety. And again, became one of
the only time anyone has ever said that sentence.
Yeah. Wow. Exactly. I mean, just a true legend of the cinema. But interestingly enough, in 1945, he was hired by the U.S. Department of Defense's Psychological Warfare Department to make a propaganda film called Death Mills, which highlighted the atrocities committed by the Nazis in ghettos and concentration camps, and was intended to be screened for the people of West Germany during the U.S. occupation of West Germany from 1946 to 1952. Effectively a movie of rubbing the German people's noses in the crimes that were committed during the war.
Imagine that one person watching that movie going, I thought this was a spa town.
Right? It's kind of wild.
And now for something completely unrelated.
This reminds me of a mutual friend of ours in college who used to work at a video store. And he was working the counter when a young couple came in and came up to the counter and they were looking around and they were like, do you have that movie, the one about the Jews that go to camp? And without thinking, our mutual friend said with horror, do you mean Schindler's List? And the couple looked at him in horror and said, no, the comedy. And he was like, oh, Wet Hot American Summer. It's over there.
No. Oh, how would you live with yourself? You'd have to quit your job. You'd have to quit.
Wow, that video store closed like, I don't know, probably 5 months later. So.
No, I think it was years later. He stayed there for quite a while.
I've made so many faux pas whilst working in customer service, but like that would kill me off.
2 very different movies with the same log line.
You are familiar with some bits of Death Mills because if you've ever been to a museum with an exhibit on the Holocaust, there's almost always a picture of a bunch of wedding rings in a box and like a guy sort of like scooping his hands in and holding them up. That's from Death Mills. That is where that image comes from. So Billy Wilder has contributed, as an Austrian Jew, of course, he wanted to make sure that the sort of, there's a,
the scope of the horror was very understandable. It is very difficult to process numbers. And when you can get a visual that really instills both the enormity of the loss as well as the personal imagery, then you can make an emotional impact. It's almost like the arts matters. And there's a reason that one of the first things that happened in our new administration was the dismantling of the Kennedy Center and its total takeover by the commander-in-chief.
They came for the arts first. One of the interesting things about Billy Wilder, of course, he goes on to have a great career, a lot of comedies, a lot of dramas. Like I said, The Apartment, which won Best Picture that year. He, in the 1980s, was tapped to adapt a book into a movie called Schindler's Ark, which is the name of the book, by the way, about a German officer who, at some point in time during his work with Jews in his factory, realized, oh, this is actually horrible, and maybe I should figure out how to get some of these people to safety. If not out of Germany, at least somehow, some way, get them siloed off from all of the madness.
Just to share I've actually never seen Schindler's List.
Yeah, I've actually never seen Schindler's List myself. I'm more familiar with the book, which is weird. I keep meaning to watch it, but like, when are you gotta be ready for that.
Right, it's hard to find the mood. It's hard to be like...
We watched it in school and it's really amazing, but it is so depressing that it's not really something you feel like revisiting. But yeah, I remember struggling because like people were like, oh, it's so boring and like being teenagers about it. But for me, it was actually really triggering because of what happened to my family.
So, unsurprisingly, I think, for both of you or anyone listening, Billy Wilder it was a bit much. It was a little too close to home. Eventually, he just thought, I can't do this. I can't make this. He was getting a little bit older anyway, so he passes off on the production, and the man who had bought the rights decides to direct it himself. That's little Stevie Spielberg, right? So it moves from Billy Wilder to Steven Spielberg. When Spielberg was casting. So the good news is like people like Billy Wilder were like a part of that process, and Spielberg was very engaged with this generation of people who like who did that. Like they did, Billy Wilder and Marlene Dietrich are also Schindlers. They are similar in that they were, saving people. He had that consultation, and it was really important for him to try to capture the reality of it. So when he cast the movie, even though guys like Warren Beatty or like Kevin Costner wanted to play Schindler, he was like, no, we need someone who isn't famous, which at the time was true. So they end up casting Liam Neeson to play Schindler, and then Ralph Fiennes plays Hermann Gott, who's the real just evil guy. If you ever read Spielberg talking about why he chose Ralph Fiennes, he describes the audition that Ralph Fiennes did as being like this sexy evil. There was just something in his eyes that was like, I'm drawn to him, but I also know I'm going to be destroyed by him if I come into his orbit, which I think is a great description of Ralph Fiennes. So there's a really pivotal character, Helen Hirsch, who's the maid to Hermann Gott. And again, she only has a short scene in which Hermann Gott attempts to sexually assault her, but he also repeatedly just mistreats her because she's Jewish and she's his maid. That's a thing in Schindler's List. You haven't seen it, so I need to describe that. And so Spielberg, again, needed to get an actress to play that role who wasn't a big name, so you don't lose yourself. So you don't think, I'm watching a movie. You think you're watching the thing happen. And he ended up casting Embeth Davidtz. Now, you might remember Embeth Davidtz, Jason, as the Miss Honey, the nice teacher in Matilda.
Nope.
No?
No, Matilda, I'm sure that I watched it, but I have no memory of
loved
it.
Matilda growing up.
It's a blank spot in my brain.
She's not like a huge name, but for some people, she's very important. And the thing about Embeth Davidtz is she spent much of her childhood in Johannesburg in South Africa. She's South African. And Her father adopted a black child illegally while she lived there. And part of the reason she took the role is because she grew up being afraid that the authorities in South Africa were going to take her father away from her, if not do even worse things to punish her family because they disregarded the racial laws. So for her, Schindler's List was also a hugely important.
It's almost like you're saying that there's parallels between the South African apartheid and the German Holocaust, and that a very prominent and famous South African who may do something that looks entirely like a Nazi salute may not be a crazy coincidence. It's just, I feel like you're connecting things that actually seem really fucking related.
There. Oh, so far, we haven't even gotten to the seemingly unrelated yet, Jason.
Also, World War II, cross it off. Apartheid, cross it off. This is like a greatest hits.
This is the bingo card episode.
This feels like a season finale of all the worst parts of the world.
The season finale of the world.
Are you going to talk about Japanese internment too? Like what other atrocities can you fit into this episode?
So, much like Dietrich, much like Marlene Dietrich, this is like her first big role for Beth Davids. And she also thought, oh, I'll go to Hollywood. She'd done movies in South Africa. Now she goes to Hollywood. Schindler's List. I mean, hey, what a first, at bat.
It sounds like it launched a lot of careers.
Yes. So she went to Hollywood, but unlike Dietrich and Wilder, she thought Hollywood was, not as bad as apartheid, but it was rough.
Okay, yeah. You're just not as bad as apartheid. Yeah, I hope fucking not.
Yeah. But she describes like it was a very controlling and manipulative environment. There was a lot of predators and a lot of like horrible mistreatment of people based on the way they look. They don't show up to the right parties and do the right things. She found a lot of parallels between her childhood and her time in Hollywood. So that's why she's not only a household name. You haven't necessarily heard of her because she's sort of retired from acting for a while, but she has most recently come back. She's got a movie she directed very recently. Jason, what's the name of that movie?
I believe that it is Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight.
Take a look at it. I hear good things. So with Schindler's List being her debut, a lot of her career is these really dour, kind of sad, intense films. Her second Hollywood movie ever is Murder in the First, which is a story about the horrors of Alcatraz prison and the case of Henry Young, which is called the case that took down Alcatraz. And that movie, Jason, the actor playing Henry Young, is Kevin Bacon, which means that Hitler is 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. That's the seemingly unrelated.
This is the worst game you've played.
So, Jason, could you?
I'm sure Kevin Bacon is thrilled with this.
Could you describe for the audience what 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is?
Kevin Bacon is a prolific American actor who has become memeified by the idea that if you try hard enough, pretty much every single actor in the world is potentially only 6 degrees away from having worked with Kevin Bacon. And so anybody who acted with somebody in a movie or TV show can then you move on to that person and that person and that person. It's basically the New York Times Connections game, but with Kevin Bacon as the end point, the beginning point, the center of the world.
Yes. So yeah, Kevin Bacon, it's just, you name literally, actually only 91% of all the actors in the world, technically. But if you name pretty much any actor, you can then say that actor was in this movie and with this person, and that one was in this movie with this person, and that movie was in this movie with Kevin Bacon. It always works out that way. So again, Hitler was there's footage of Hitler. He plays himself.
So now that we've gone through it, track it. It goes from Hitler to Kurt Garen.
Hold on. There's footage of him. So he plays himself in Theresienstadt, which is directed and features Kurt Garen, who was in Blue Angel with Marlene Dietrich, who did about 5 different movies, including A Foreign Affair with Billy Wilder, who then passed to Steven Spielberg the Schindler's List from his work on Schindler's Ark, where M. Beth Davids was in, and then she was later in Murder in the First with Kevin Bacon. There are other ways to do this where you only use actors, but this obviously was following the theme of like...
Yeah, I just think the only one that I'm going to... Gotta check your work, buddy, and put an asterisk. I don't think Billy Wilder passing the movie on to Steven Spielberg would technically count for 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
I think if Billy Wilder had been in a movie or had even directed a movie with Steven Spielberg. So
if it makes you feel better, originally it was going to be Billy Wilder to Jack Lemmon, and then Jack Lemmon was in JFK with Kevin Bacon. But again, Jack Lemmon has nothing to do with the Holocaust. Well, fortunately.
Don't say unfortunately. Thank goodness.
God rest his soul, Jack Lemmon. So it still stands. Hitler is within 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. And why Kevin Bacon? Any ideas why it's Kevin Bacon, Jason?
I think he is an extremely prolific actor. He is kind of was an everyman, and I think it just became the face of a generation of film in some respects. I mean, it really has cemented this idea that like Kevin Bacon is that guy that's in a thing.
Yeah, he is that guy that's in a thing. But the interesting things about Kevin Bacon, of course, is that he's not like the most prolific actor, which you would think, that's actually a matter of debate. But you would think then you would want to go with whoever's worked with the most actors, right? He's not even, although Kevin Bacon does, he's in comedies like Animal House, and he's in really terrifying movies like Murder in the First. Like, he does have a range.
He's been a working actor for multiple decades. I think that he crosses a lot of different generations and bridges. Also, his name is Bacon. And I'm not being facetious when I say I do think a memorable name that ties people to that salty, smoky, sweet sensation. I think people have a fond feeling for Kevin Bacon because they have a fond feeling for bacon.
Yeah.
Also, Gen Z check. I think I've only watched Footloose with him in.
Good enough.
I vaguely watched it. But also, I don't know if most people in my generation, and I'm sorry to speak to people who might be listening and being like, this isn't true, just know him for being in the EE adverts.
Yeah. Sorry, Jason, you don't know what that means. Kevin Bacon is the spokesperson for EE, which is like one of is the Verizon Wireless of Britain. It's just a cell phone like provider, and he does all the EE commercials.
So I'm personally very surprised that he's the thing that connects all these people. Are like using him to relate to people, because to me, like, there's so many more people in Hollywood that have worked with more people.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Naomi, in that Gen Z not as intimately familiar with Kevin Bacon. He was in Maxine last year, so I don't know, maybe they saw him in that. But this is a Gen X thing. This is a before the internet. If you wanted to show off, you could do the 6 degrees of separation game with Kevin Bacon. It's very much a pre-internet thing. It's also, like you said, I agree. I think the fact that his name is Kevin Bacon means that people like remember his name. Like, a lot of times you're like, that guy in the thing, you know who I'm talking, the eye, you know who I'm talking about, where he's like,
Kevin the one Bacon. The one I want for breakfast.
So the interesting thing,
because he's a snack, anyway.
is it actually has nothing to do with Kevin Bacon being prolific. This is actually a phenomenon in probability called the 6 handshakes rule, which argues that a person who shakes hands with 30 people, and then those 30 people shake hands with 30 more people, and then those 30 with 30 more people, and so on. After 6 iterations, you will have every person in the United States connected in this handshake sequence. And then if you do it one more time, every human being in the world will have been connected in this handshake sequence. It has to always be someone who hasn't already shaken hands in this system.
Why do people think about shit like this?
Because it's actually it's really helpful when setting up like firewalls and things, like trying to understand where the connections are is actually super useful in sort of cascading the system. So probability useful in things that you and I don't do. But this is a really well studied phenomenon that actually all of us, all humans, are really closely connected. The Small World Project from Columbia University showed that with emails alone, just by sending out emails, they have potentially contacted every human being, even people who do not have direct access to the internet, in as few as 7 iterations.
When I was in high school, I kept a chart of everybody that had hooked up with everybody.
Yeah.
Which is weird to say now, but it was a game, and I was probably jealous because I didn't have many connections on the chart. So I was the chart master, and we were liberally using the word hookup. For lots of people, that means the sex, but for us, it meant anything from the make out to the sex. So just to be clear. And because I went to a Jewish day school, it meant that I knew people that went to Jewish sleepaway camps. And that meant that on one side of the chart, we had Bill Clinton, who got to Monica Lewinsky, who got through the Jewish camps back to the Jewish day school, all the way back to Jewish sleepaway camps to an actual literal goat, because a friend of mine got drunk and made out with a goat. So I was able to get from Bill Clinton to a goat. And I carried that around in my pocket, and I remember one day some ladies from the grade above me stopping me, and they didn't really know who I was, and I didn't really know who they were, and they were like, "Are you the one with the chart?" And I was like, "I am in trouble. I'm busted. This is weirder than I think it was." And I was like, "Yes, I am." And they're like, "We have stuff to add." And then they proceeded to help fill in a lot, because this was an open source project. This was like this is the Firefox of teenage hookups.
I care a lot more about that than I do about Kevin Bacon, actually. I want to see that chart.
But it is a genuine example of how the world is actually a great deal smaller than we are willing to, I think, admit to ourselves. And by playing 6 degrees of separation, you can connect to people who are so seemingly unrelated as Hitler and Kevin Bacon. And unfortunately, that means that probably a lot more of us than we thought are closer to Hitler than we hoped. But on the flip side, a lot of us are closer to Kevin Bacon than we ever dreamed.
So absolutely lovingly acknowledging and agreeing that one of the takeaways for today's episode is that we are often more connected to other people than we think. And if we put a bit of thought into that, there are probably lots of networking opportunities you've never thought about, recently unemployed folks. So get at it. I think my bigger takeaway of all of this is the fundamental importance of the arts. And I think that oftentimes, especially now, there's maybe been a concerted effort to paint the artistic class as either being the elite and the out of touch, or the foppish, or it's not a societal necessity. But what you've shown is, through examples both beautiful and heinous, how important art and storytelling is in shaping the narrative of a culture, truly shaping the narratives of people. Because if you are living in Nazi Germany and you're watching their equivalent of Fox News and all you're seeing is the Spa documentary, how are you supposed to know that that's complete bullshit? It's creating a worldview, and it is really difficult for us to step outside of those worldviews. Similarly, how many people know about the Holocaust simply because of Schindler's List? And the further we get away from impactful storytelling like that, the more it loses its reach and its impact. That's partly why, in hearing you talk about it, I was like, this Marlene Dietrich movie would be a really powerful movie to tell right now. So don't dismiss art. The people who are in power don't dismiss it. They want to control it, and they want to diminish it specifically so that they can influence you.
Yeah, see? That's what I'm talking about.
Things that I learned today. I mean, I didn't know about Kurt Garren. I didn't realize that his last performance would be singing Mac the Knife at gunpoint for his captors.
Yep.
And I think the other takeaway I have is, ultimately, you need to do what you need to do to survive, But when your survival is predicated on being useful, you're never actually going to survive. And ultimately continuing to do the things that are terrible for people who are terrible only kind of postpones the inevitable. Reminds me a lot, weirdly, obviously the stakes are much lower, of Severance, and how all of the workers on the inside don't even have the capacity to understand that you could challenge the system because they've been so baked into that system. So,
that is not a spoiler, by the way. Anyone who wants to complain, that's like established in the first episode.
No, that's the premise.
I just want to get, because people get a little crazy with spoiler alerts. There's no spoiler to that. So
that's a log line. So Kurt Guerin, I didn't know the story of Marlene Dietrich, and I think that that's a really wonderful story. And I didn't know that Schindler's List was originally called Schindler's Ark, and I understand why it was, but I think it's a good name shift because it's probably not the best metaphor to shove the Jews in 2 by 2 to save them from the flood. Totally understand.
Steven Spielberg, smart guy.
Branding is important, and the list feels a little bit better than the Ark under these circumstances. Andrew, is there anything about the research and the process of putting this particular episode together that you'd like to share from a process point of view?
I want to note that this started as a joke in my mind for a bonus episode where I thought, what would be the weirdest way to start an episode by asking Jason what he knows about Hitler? And what came out of that, like doing the research, because this was going to be a bonus episode, but the thread of the Schindler's List of it all, and like each of these people being connected to either escaping or being destroyed by the Holocaust and all of these sort of things, except for Kevin Bacon, were really interesting. They came up along the way. So when you're doing research, I really recommend that you not be super goal oriented. Like, free up some space in your mind to pay attention to what's happening and to not go too far off the beaten path, but take some jumps here and there through what you're researching and looking into, because you may turn what was going to be maybe a completely silly episode into something that is actually really deeply researched and maybe had some interesting conclusions based especially on what Jason had to say at the end.
Takeaway is that you are closer to atrocities than you think.
Yeah.
People don't talk often about the pain in their lives for lots of perfectly valid reasons. It's not always fun to talk about at parties, but chances are that if there is something terrible that's happening in the world, it is affecting lots of people, and we often act like it is very separate from us and very distant from us. So the counterpoint or the parallel to the note that you are closer to people than you think you are, that also means you're closer to their pain than you think you are. And it does not necessarily, sometimes it's a survival mechanism to not live in that pain all the time, but it is not useful for all of us to pretend like things don't affect us when they do, because the walls that crumble are much closer to your door than you would ever assume. On that note, we have wrapped up another exciting installment of Seemingly Unrelated. Thank you so much for joining us. We started a Substack. If you want more information behind the scenes stories, things cut from individual episodes, check us out at seeminglyunrelated.substack.com. Check us out on everywhere you can get your podcasts, and continue to like, share, and subscribe. Tickle the algorithm. We love it when it gets tickled. Thanks so much, and stay curious.
Bye.
Bye.
Seemingly Unrelated is a Life's Little Murder Boards production. Created and hosted by Andrew Johnstone and Jason Howard. Audio production and editing services provided by Naomi Cohn. Our artwork is by Megan Zemet. The theme song is Irizumi by Pistol Jazz. To find out more about everyone involved and access the show notes for this episode, visit us at seeminglyunrelatedpod.com.
I gotta tell you, I can't understand a word of what she's saying.
No,
So I can't respond to you 90% of the time is more what I mean, because I actually don't know what you're saying.
Oh, that makes me feel a bit better, because every time I say something, you look at me like this. And I think,
Yeah.
if I said something really weird.
It's all this is what I'm hearing. I'm literally just hearing like, if it's the audio version of you looked at somebody who is like fragmented into a prism, that's all I'm getting from you. Just bacon.
I just thought that I wasn't being very fun today.